10 years ago, I met a shaman, and this interaction changed the course of my life. And today I'm going to speak to you about how the practices of psychiatry and shamanism may intersect, where psychiatry meets shamanism. So, I trained as a medical doctor starting in 2007, and after I finished medical school, I spent a few years in general medicine before specializing in psychiatry. But I quickly became disillusioned by the way in which we were treating many of our mental health conditions, particularly the drug treatments. I found that our patients would just come back, time and time again, so much so that we even have a term for that. We call it the revolving door syndrome. And I thought to myself, there must be a better way. So I decided to take a break from medicine, and I traveled to Central America. And whilst in a cafe in Guatemala, I found myself sitting next to somebody who was training to be a shaman. Now, a shaman is a type of traditional healer who often works with plant medicines, and they're believed to have power in the so-called spirit world. We were roughly the same age and grade, and he was training with a group of indigenous peoples in the Amazon rainforest called the Shipibo, and myself in Western medicine. And he told me these amazing stories about the psychedelic plant brew, ayahuasca, using it to help treat many of the difficulties that I've been struggling to treat in my own patients back home. And so when he invited me to come with him to Peru, I said yes. So, what actually is ayahuasca? Well, it's a potent psychedelic brew that's drank by many indigenous communities throughout the Amazon rainforest, and it's used for a wide variety of purposes, from healing through to hunting. It usually contains the potent psychedelic dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, and according to the shamans, it allows you to enter the world of the spirits. And the Shipibo believe that this is where the healing happens. Our first records surrounding the use of ayahuasca are from about 150 years ago. However, shamanic pouches containing DMT have been found dating back around 1,000 years. And when we listen to indigenous groups, such as the Shipibo, they say they've been using it for millennia. In fact, they go as far to say that the combination of plants that makes up the brew was given to them by the plants themselves. And the so-called spirits of the plants taught them these medicinal healing songs called icaros. And the Shipibo believe that these chants allow them to communicate with their patients. And they believe they can even ask them to heal their patients. Shipibo ayahuasca ceremonies are usually led by a healer, or curandero, and they take place at night in a circular wooden hut. Everybody in the ceremony drinks the brew, including the curandero, who chants these medicinal healing songs, or icaros, throughout the night. I then started looking into the research that had been done into ayahuasca. Some early-stage research did exist, but scientific research into ayahuasca in the Amazon rainforest was limited. About 6 months later, we conducted our first academic study, which was subsequently peer-reviewed and published, investigating the effects of ayahuasca on personality. Our findings showed that ayahuasca decreased how neurotic participants were immediately following their retreats and 6 months later. Although this was preliminary research, the results were promising and suggested something interesting could be happening when people drink the brew. Over the years, our team expanded, and I created the research not-for-profit on Aya Science. And I decided to focus my full attention on the work in the rainforest, exploring the relationship between psychiatry and shamanism, and completed my PhD entitled Amazonian Ayahuasca and Mental Health Outcomes. This PhD was comprised of 5 research papers, published in academic journals, and the initial results are promising. Anxiety and depression lessen, self-compassion increases, and negative memories lose their grip. However, further research is needed in this area. And as I continued with the research, I was asked more and more, why? Why do all this research into ayahuasca? And I began asking myself the question, do indigenous peoples need Western scientists to validate their practices? Rather than placing one knowledge system, the Western one, in a dominant position, should we not be giving equal recognition to both, valuing diversity in different ways of thinking? Could it be that indigenous peoples such as the Shipibo have a greater understanding of Amazonian plants and their uses? By recognizing and learning from different ways of thinking and combining knowledge systems, could we not come to a greater understanding of ourselves, nature, and the world at large? And as I continue to spend more and more time in the Amazon rainforest, working with the shamans, it became increasingly apparent that there was a striking difference between the way in which the shamans were explaining the treatment of their patients when compared to the Western scientific paradigm. From a Western perspective, the chemicals in ayahuasca were interacting with receptors in the brain, such as the serotonin receptor, and the brew was altering the connectivity between different brain regions. But from the perspective of the Shipibo, the positive therapeutic effects were put down almost entirely to the so-called communication with spirits and what they believed were the removal of energetic blockages. In fact, according to the Shipibo, it wasn't even necessary to drink ayahuasca. And all the shamans asked was that you attend their ceremonies to allow them to do their work through the communication with these so-called entities, with the number of participants actually drinking ayahuasca only increasing in recent years with the growing popularity of the brew. But the Shipibo shamans go as far to say that it's these spirits that are responsible for the healing, and they believe the role of the curandero is to negotiate with them on our behalf. The Shipibo believe that this communication is achieved through master plant dietas. This is seen as a sacred process by the Shipibo and involves spending prolonged periods in isolation, fasting, and consuming small amounts of specific plant in order to connect and form a relationship with the spirit of that plant, which according to the Shipibo becomes an ally and can be used in ceremonies to treat participants. The curanderos emphasize that they, the plant spirits, are the real doctors and the ones responsible for the healing. Now, for many Western scientists, this seemingly opposing paradigm can be seen as problematic, leading them to dismiss such concepts as metaphor or theology. But as scientists working in an alternative paradigm, one could argue that it's our responsibility to respectfully listen and not disregard the words of the traditional doctors we work alongside. If we are serious about conducting truly ethical, inter-ethnic research, we need to be taking these concepts seriously and including indigenous healers at every stage of the research process, from the study conception to the interpretation of results, and making sure that these findings are accessible to the communities that we work with. So, what does this look like in practice? There are obvious issues to do with the measurement of the so-called communication with spirits. And according to the Shipibo, we arguably lack the technology to begin to answer many of these questions. But if we are serious about truly improving the lives of our patients, perhaps an interparadigmal approach based on listening and respect is required. There are, however, potential issues associated with the merger of differing paradigms. For example, participants may undergo ontological shock, experiencing confusion when forced to question their worldview and adapt to a new way of thinking. Psychedelics have also been shown to induce highly suggestible states, which might result in some participants more readily adopting alternative worldviews. Sufficient psychotherapeutic preparation and integration is required to ensure the safety of participants undergoing these experiences. And there are also numerous ethical issues that need to be carefully considered. And science, unfortunately, does not have the best track record in this area. We need to be focusing on descriptive science, rather than trying to prove, disprove, or validate indigenous practices. And issues to do with the potential commodification of these practices also need to be carefully considered. With the growing popularity of ayahuasca and other traditional medicines, and the potential medicalization of plants deemed so sacred to many, we need to be striving to act in reciprocal relationship with genuine benefit sharing, acting with integrity, openness, and respect, listening to those who have worked with these medicines for generations. By having an understanding of plants, such as ayahuasca, from both an indigenous and a Western viewpoint, where these ways of thinking work together and where they don't, perhaps we can come to a greater understanding of what the Shipibo healers refer to as plant teachers. And if we do manage to do this, valuing diversity in different ways of thinking, respectfully recognizing and listening to both paradigms, acknowledging the reasoning behind traditional knowledge systems, then perhaps that will be of benefit to us, the indigenous peoples we work with, and the environment at large. Thank you very much.